Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Leading from Alignment. My co-host, Jim Wiegand, is out for the day, and so I'm flying solo, but I have a special guest with me today, and really excited to have Josh Spurlock with us. Hi, Josh. Good to see you.
So good to be back. Missing Jim, but we'll get along without him, I guess.
We'll do our best. Yes, we had Josh back about 3 months ago, and the response to the two podcasts, Josh, that we recorded with you, I think it was back in February or March, was overwhelming. We just got so much good feedback, and so I thought, boy, we got to have on.
I'm not surprised, that the topic is such a important one for pastors. And just really creating some space to recognize the struggle that is part of being a first responder and really being in that front lines of the trauma in people's lives. And I mean, anybody who's functioning in that capacity could really relate to the experience that we talked through. So they're not alone.
Well, Josh, in pods 76 and 77, you introduced that concept to us of pastors as first responders. And I wondered if you could just give us maybe a 3-minute summary of that concept, and that'll kind of set up our conversation for the rest.
Absolutely. So we think of first responders, or what comes to mind perhaps are paramedics and firefighters and police that are kind of responding to crises of one sort or another. But right in the mix with that are pastors that have deep relationships with their people and who are called upon in the moments of struggle, big and small, in life, to come alongside and bear that burden and those burdens with individuals. And there's a secondary traumatization that happens in the context of doing that, in the same way that those who show up on a car accident and see mangled bodies and the kinds of trauma in that setting, their physiology is impacted by that experience, that their bodies and the brain has an impact that it receives from being exposed to the intensity of that experience. And pastors have that same experience, that they are in that space, and rather it is really traumatic kinds of experience that they're coming alongside folks in, or the smaller kinds of life traumas that folks experience that have a cumulative effect over time. And so recognizing that reality of their life and experience helps to then inform the kind of preventative care that's necessary in order to take care of the injury that takes place.
And I just thought that was such a brilliant picture for us, because I don't think any of us who have pastored in a church have ever been taught to think of ourselves in that way. And the fact that we're ignorant about it doesn't actually help us, right? It hurts us.
Right. You can't take preventative care and action, and you can't take action to address the injury that's taken place if it's not on your radar. Right. And so that awareness and having it be on your radar is really the first step in being able to address the impact of those things.
So Josh, in those earlier pods, you said something, and we didn't dig into it because we were running out of time. But I remember it blew Jim away and it blew me away when you said it, and it had to do with how wounds and unfinished business from our past impact our leadership today. So, can you talk to that? How do the wounds and unfinished business from our past impact us in pastoral leadership in the current time that we live in?
Yeah. So it would be helpful to think just a little bit about, or maybe have a backdrop of some neurobiology a little bit, which I know this isn't a podcast on neurobiology, so bear with me that we won't get too deep into the weeds a little bit. But I think it's important for us to have an embodied spirituality. that there's a kind of a modern day Gnostic struggle that we can get into in the church, where we somehow completely divorce and separate the spiritual from the physical. And in doing so, we deny the realities and limitations of the body. And so if we're going to be holistic and we're going to have an embodied spirituality that acknowledges both the embodiment of Christ in a physical body, but also the reality that God created us to be embodied beings that have biology that influences our experience of life, and that's forever going to be the case, right? That's the whole story of the resurrection, is that we're not going to be disembodied spiritual kind of floaty beings out there, but that we were created to have a body. We have a body now. We'll have a new body with the resurrection, right? So theologically, if we accept that to be true, then having a little understanding of this body is helpful, can be useful.
Sure.
So that's my take on it anyways, right?
Okay.
So if we assume all that, accept all that theologically, then we can turn our attention to think a little bit about how memory and expectations work, right? And what in counseling we call internal working models, right? So an internal working model is essentially the things that we've learned through the experiences of our life, the compilation of the experiences that we've had in our life. That in an ideal world, in a perfect world, all the experiences that we have in our life equip us for an accurate view of self and an accurate view of others, and give us the character structure internally. And what I mean is not morality, but I mean the equipment internally to be able to navigate things in life and the hard things in life. However, we live in a fallen world, broken world, and all of our experiences in life are not facilitative of having a accurate perception of self and of others, and of constructing functional equipment inside, right? That all of us have a continuum of experience, right? A mix of experiences that are very helpful in helping us understand who we are and what we can expect from people and others, and how we relate to God, and how he feels towards us, and his thoughts towards us, and experiences that sabotage that, right?
Right.
So when we're thinking about these wounds, we're talking about experiences of life that we've had that have had an impact on us in a way that sabotage us in one way or another. And because those experiences are historical in nature, meaning they happen time-wise in the past,
Right.
they're not necessarily on our mind today.
Yeah.
Now, the impact of them is present with us today, right? That I have a Lion King quote that comes to mind, right? Where I'm thinking of Rafiki, with his little staff when he smacks Simba on the head,
Yes.
and Simba says, "Hey, what's that about?" And Rafiki says, "It doesn't matter. It's in the past," right? Kind of tongue in cheek, calling out Simba on his perspective. But those things still have an impact because they get activated in the present. Those wounds get bumped into in the present, and they come out in the present.
Yeah. That makes sense. Josh, can you give me like an example of how that might work? I mean, a real life example of a wound from the past that gets bumped into, and then that reaction, or a common reaction to that wound from a leader's perspective. Can you give me an example?
Yes. So there's a vast majority of are a vast variety of experiences that folks can have that can show up in a variety of different ways. But a common experience, specifically with pastors and a lot of pastors I would work with, would be experiences of life surrounding messages of rejection. And that there would be messages of value tied to performance. That I'm acceptable, I'm lovable, I'm good enough based on my performance or what I can do for others.
Right.
And that the message that I get back from folks, that they're pleased with me, with my performance, and that it helps set aside my anxiety around that messaging that I'm somehow inadequate, somehow lacking, somehow that I have to prove that not true. I'm unacceptable for one reason or another, and I have to prove my acceptableness through performance.
Yeah.
And so when there's experiences in the present that bump into that, the person leaves the church. There's conflict around a decision that a pastor makes. Somebody doesn't like a sermon, right? And leave back or comments.
That never happens, right?
These are all hypotheticals. Obviously most pastors never experience anything of this nature, but hypothetically speaking, it bumps into that wound from those. Bumps into this shooting pain that comes from that.
Yeah.
Pain, to not feel that pain, we do things to avoid pain, right? Most of us are pain aversive. I am. I'm never like, I could go for a good poke in the eye right now. Said no one ever, because none of us like to experience pain. And so we can tend to structure life in such a way as to avoid the things that would bump into.
Right.
We can be passive where we really need to be assertive in a situation. Right?
Yeah.
We can kind of avoid putting ourselves in circumstances that might lead to us feeling inadequate rejection, but also hinder our ability to execute our role as a leader, right? And cause us to lose confidence in those that we're leading, or those we're leading to lose confidence in us because of our difficulty navigating those things.
Right.
Sometimes it can just become paralyzing altogether, right? What pastor hasn't, been in the position of having had maybe a message or a season where things felt dry and creativity was restricted, and they're kind of, staring at a blank piece of paper or a blank word processor screen, terrified of upcoming Sunday where they're expected to perform,
right?
Feeling like they don't have it in them, like 1 and 1, right? 100%,
right?
All of us in there, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise,
Josh, I just, as you're talking about that, I see so many manifestations just of the rejection wound. The inability to say no, the inability to slow down and take a day off, check out at a reasonable time in the evening. And I mean, we're just talking about one wound, right? That can really bump into or manifest, I guess is a better way to say it, in a variety of ways. But the problem isn't I gotta have better time management, although that might help a little bit, right?
Totally.
The problem is getting to that wound and getting healed.
John, you're spot on, right? Like you get it totally. That we can, what happens is we try to address the symptom.
Yeah.
It's a lot like mowing down a dandelion.
Right.
You mow down the dandelion, a few days later, you got another dandelion in the same spot, right?
Yeah.
Because trying to manage the symptoms with, a time management book or a new life hack, navigate this, or that sort of thing, won't address what's really driving that And so it has limited success. Might help a little bit, might help for a while, but then we kind of are right back into that same cycle, that same struggle.
Yeah. Josh, we're starting to butt up against time already. I just wanted to ask you one more question. Well, would you stay for another podcast? Because I think we got a lot more to talk about.
John, I love this. I love pastors. And so absolutely.
Okay. So here's the last question. We talked about rejection as an example of a wound from our past. What are some of the most common wounds that you're observing among pastors, Josh? I know you work with pastors all over the world, actually. Yeah. And what are some of the common ones, maybe the top 3 or 4 that you see over and over and over again?
Yeah, so the rejection wound, that piece, am I acceptable? Am I lovable? That is a super common one. Another one that oftentimes will show up is this relationship with anger that's really difficult, right? That there's some messaging that says anger and the experience of anger is bad, and that it's evil, and that you shouldn't experience anger and you shouldn't express anger.
I was one of those as a young lead pastor.
You get those messages kind of in your life, and which is not biblical, right? It's a distortion. God experiences anger. God expresses anger. He doesn't sin much. Like, it's not a biblical concept. If we're created in the image of God, the idea that we would feel an anger, a righteous anger about things that are not right, the fact that God would wire our body, but we could go down and spend a whole podcast on that piece. Correct. But it's a common one, that there's a relationship with anger that is not healthy there, from some messaging that then, instead of allowing anger to be something that energizes taking action and being assertive and standing up against things that are not okay and aren't good in a way that feels congruent and healthy, it instead gets redirected or bottled or kind of shamed into a space that it becomes destructive.
Right.
And so that's a really common one that we see over time begin to sabotage folks in their ministry and the work that they're doing in their relationships. So that's, that would be just another example of, and we could probably take another podcast just listing all the different ones that are possible, but
yeah, maybe we'll do that sometime down the road. I think that might be helpful. Well, listen, Josh, thanks for agreeing to come back for another podcast. And what's the best way for somebody to, if they're interested in reaching out to you for help, what would be the best way for them to connect to you?
Yeah, so I have a team of counselors that work at My Counselor Online that put together, that I've selected, hired, and we've built a training process to really help know how to hone in on these kind of core character issues, structures, difficulties that underlie the common struggles that folks face. And so you could reach out just by visiting our website at mycounselor.online. That's mycounselor.online, and can connect with any of the folks that are on our team. You can reach out to me specifically either through that site or on social media using the handle Talk to Spurlock. So it's just my last name, Spurlock.
Awesome. And to those of you who are listening today, the reason we do what we do here is we want to try to bring content and help to you in areas that you really need help in. And I think today really hit the nail on the head. So we want to thank all of you who are listening, who are watching via video today. And we want you to know that we're praying for you. We love you. And we ask God often to help you continue to lead on the line.